My name is Rachel Voss. I'm 32 years old. And the Tuesday morning my cousin forwarded me a family group chat I had been deliberately excluded from was the morning I finally understood that the people who get called dramatic are usually the ones who have been paying the closest attention. I found out because my cousin Becca hit forward instead of reply. She was trying to respond to my Aunt Paulette about a question regarding the catering deposit, whether it should be split evenly or weighted by how many people each family branch was bringing. The message she meant to send went to the thread. The message she actually sent went to me, with the entire 62-message chain attached above it. I received it at 8:23 on a Tuesday morning at my desk in the financial analysis department at Carver and Wynn Consulting, where I had been working since 7 with a cup of coffee I had not yet touched because I had been focused on a variance report due to a client at noon. I set the report aside. I read all 62 messages. It took me 19 minutes. The thread had been active for 11 days. It covered, in considerable detail, the logistics of a Voss family reunion to be held at my grandmother's lake house on Crescent Lake, the one on Timber Ridge Road that my grandmother, Dorothy Voss, had owned since 1987 and in which she had hosted 34 years of summers before her mobility had changed enough that she could no longer manage the property's 2 flights of stairs. The thread discussed catering options and a shortlist of 3 local vendors. It discussed room assignments with a specificity that suggested someone had made a floor plan. It discussed a rental company deposit of what my Aunt Paulette described as already handled, meaning paid, meaning a financial commitment had been made against a property that my family had not checked the title on. My mother's message 41 of 62, sent on a Thursday at 9:47 in the morning, said, "Don't mention it to Rachel. She'll only cause drama." My sister Jenna had replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. I read that exchange twice. Then I set my phone face down on my desk, picked up my coffee, found it cold, and put it back down. I looked at the variance report on my screen for a moment without reading it. Then I opened my laptop browser, went to the county recorder's public records portal for the township where Crescent Lake was located, typed in the address of the property at 4 Timber Ridge Road, and waited 11 seconds for the search to return results. The deed that came up was dated March of 2021. It was a quitclaim deed transferring sole ownership of the property from Dorothy and Voss to Rachel Marie Voss. My grandmother's signature. A notary stamp from a woman named Cheryl Lim at Birchwood Title on Birchwood Road. Recorded with the county on March 19, 2021, 3 years, 2 months, and 4 days before the Tuesday morning I was reading it for the first time on a public portal. I wrote down the recording number in the margin of a printed copy of my variance report because it was the closest piece of paper I had. Then I finished the variance report because it was due at noon and the client was not responsible for my family's decisions. I sent it at 11:47. Then I called my grandmother's real estate attorney. I want to tell you about my grandmother before anything else, because she is the reason this story holds together the way it does, and because the version of her that my family carries in their heads is not the same as the one I knew. Dorothy Voss is 81 years old. She lives now in a senior living community called Sycamore Ridge in the same town where she raised her children. In a ground-floor apartment, she is furnished with the same systematic practicality she applied to every space she inhabited for the previous 8 decades. She has a small garden on the patio that she tends herself. She reads 2 newspapers a day. She plays cards on Thursdays with a group that has been meeting in the community room for 3 years. She is, in the precise sense of the word, fine, not diminished, not confused, not in need of being managed. She made a legal decision about a piece of property she owned, with the assistance of a licensed attorney, and she made it with a full clarity that has characterized every decision I have ever watched her make. The version my family carries is different. In their version, Dorothy is a woman whose best years were the ones when the lake house was full of summer noise and children tracking sand across the kitchen floor, and who has been, since those years ended, a person to be preserved rather than consulted. This is not a cruel version. It is an affectionate one, which in some ways makes it harder to argue with. You cannot tell someone that their love is a form of not listening without it sounding like an accusation. But the practical consequence of their version was that when my grandmother made a deliberate legal decision about her property, Not one of them thought to ask her about it, and not one of them went to verify it, because they had stopped treating her as someone who made deliberate legal decisions. My grandmother had 4 children. My mother Linda, my Aunt Paulette, my Uncle Barry, and my Uncle Gus. My mother is the second oldest and has always occupied the position of the one who smooths things, the one who manages conflict by redirecting it, who translates between her siblings when translations are needed, who defaults, when forced to choose, to the interpretation of events that causes the least immediate friction. She is not dishonest. She is conflict-averse in a way that has, over the years, compounded into a pattern of omission that she may not fully recognize as its own form of dishonesty. My sister Jenna is 29 and has, for as long as I can remember, occupied a specific role in our family that I will describe as the one who makes things happen. She plans the holidays. She coordinates the birthday dinners. She is the person in the group chat who sends the first message and the one who sends the follow-up when nobody responds. She is good at organizing and she enjoys it, and she has, over the years, come to treat her organizational authority as equivalent to actual authority, to treat the fact that she made the plan as meaning she has the right to execute it, which is a meaningful distinction that the plan-making can sometimes obscure. I am a financial analyst. I have been one for 6 years, first at a smaller firm and for the past 3 years at Carver and Wynn, where my work involves examining the gap between what a set of numbers appears to say and what it actually says when you account for variables that are not immediately visible in the top-line figures. This is, I have come to understand, also a description of most family situations, though the family applications do not come with a client engagement letter and a deadline. My relationship with my grandmother has always been the one in my family that required the least management. We are similar in the specific way that skips a generation sometimes. The same preference for precision over approximation, the same discomfort with decisions made on incomplete information, the same belief that the most useful thing you can do for a problem is to understand it accurately before you do anything about it. We talked on the phone every 2 weeks. She told me things directly. I asked follow-up questions. We had, over the years, developed a shorthand that did not require much performance. In January of 2021, she called me on a weekday evening, not our usual call time, which told me she had something specific she wanted to discuss. She said she had been thinking about the lake house and what she wanted to happen to it, and that she had made a decision. She said she was going to transfer the deed to me. I asked if she had spoken to an attorney. She said she had been working with a man named Thomas Hadley at Hadley Property Law on Millbrook Avenue for the past 2 months, and that the paperwork was nearly finalized. Asked if she had told my mother or the others. She said she had not, and did not plan to immediately, and that this was her property and her decision to make, and that she was telling me because I was the one receiving it and the one who would need to understand what it meant and what it required. I said I understood. I asked what she wanted me to do with the information. She said she wanted me to keep it until there was a reason to use it and that she trusted me to know when that was. I said I would try to be worth that trust. She said she had been watching me for 32 years and was confident I already was. Then she asked about a project I had mentioned on our last call, and we talked about that for 20 minutes, and the conversation moved on in the way conversations do when the important thing has been said, and both people know it. The transfer completed in March. Thomas Hadley filed the quitclaim deed with the county recorder's office on March 19, 2021. My grandmother sent me a copy by mail, a printed scan in a white envelope with her handwriting on the front and a note inside that said, "The house is yours. Take care of the dock. It needs it every spring. Love, Grandma." I put the deed in my fireproof document safe. I drove out to Crescent Lake the following April and had the dock inspected by a man named Pete Calloway, who ran a marine services company called Lakeshore Maintenance out of a shop on Route 9. The dock needed new decking on the south end and a replaced support bracket. I paid $2,870 for the work. Pete Calloway replaced the decking and the bracket and sent me a receipt, which I filed. I had taken care of the dock every spring since. The family did not know this. Nobody had been to the lake house in 3 years, so there had been no occasion for them to notice, and I had not volunteered the information, because my grandmother had told me to hold it until there was a reason to use it, and 3 years of spring dock maintenance had not constituted that reason. 62 messages about catering and room assignments had. My grandmother's real estate attorney, Thomas Hadley, had a calm and measured manner that I associated, by the time I called him that Tuesday afternoon, with the specific professional equanimity of people who have spent many years watching families discover things they should have verified earlier. I introduced myself, gave him the recording number from the 2021 deed, and told him what I had found in the group chat. He confirmed the deed, without pulling any files. He remembered it. He said, "Ms. Voss, the property at 4 Timber Ridge Road has been solely and unambiguously in your name since March of 2021. There is no co-ownership interest, no family trust, no conditional arrangement. The transfer was a straightforward quitclaim. Your grandmother retained no ownership interest after execution." I said I had understood that to be the case and wanted to confirm it before I acted. He said, "What kind of action are you considering?" I said I was not yet certain, but that I would like to understand my options if a group of family members were planning to use the property without my knowledge or authorization. He said my options were straightforward. As the sole owner of record, I had the right to authorize or decline any use of the property, and any event held there without my authorization would constitute use of private property without owner consent. He said if I wanted, he could draft a letter to the relevant parties informing them of the title status and the need for my authorization before any event proceeded. He said this was a common enough situation that he had a template. I said that would be appropriate and asked when he could have it ready. He said by Thursday morning. I said Thursday morning worked. I gave him my sister Jenna's email address, my mother's email address, and the email address of my Aunt Paulette, whose name had appeared most frequently in the organizational messages of the thread. He said he would copy me on everything. I ended the call. I went back to my desk. I had 2 more client files to review before end of day, and I reviewed them. I drove home at 6:15. I made dinner, a lentil soup I kept in portions in the freezer, which required only reheating, and ate it at the table with the news on low in the background. I did not open the family group chat, which Becca's accidental forward had technically given me access to. I did not send any message to my sister, or my mother, or my aunt. I went to bed at 10:30. Thomas Hadley's letter went out Thursday at 9:08 in the morning. I received a copy at 9:09. The 48 hours that followed were not something I caused. They were something my family constructed, one decision at a time, in the gap between receiving the letter and being willing to accept what it said. My sister Jenna received the letter at 9:08 and called my mother at 9:14. I know the timing because my mother told me later. In the careful way she tells me things she has spent time choosing words for. My mother called Thomas Hadley's office at 9:31. His assistant, a man named Douglas Park, answered and confirmed that Mr. Hadley did represent Rachel Voss in the matter of the property at 4 Timber Ridge Road, and that the deed information cited in the letter was accurate and on public record. My mother asked if there had been a mistake. Douglas Park said there had not been a mistake. My Aunt Paulette called the county recorder's office directly. This was the detail I found when my mother relayed it to me, most clarifying about Paulette's character, not the calling, which was reasonable, but the fact that she had apparently expected the recorder's office to tell her something different than what the letter said. The recorder's office confirmed the deed. Paulette called Jenna. Jenna called my mother again. The 3 of them were apparently on a call together at some point Thursday afternoon, because my mother mentioned it in a way that made clear she had been managing 2 people simultaneously, which is a skill she has had a great deal of practice with. My mother called me Thursday at 4:52. She said, "Rachel, I think there's been some confusion." I said, "What do you think is confused?" She said, "The house. We didn't know it was in your name." I said, "It has been for 3 years. The deed is on public record." She said, "Grandma never said anything." I said, "It was her property to transfer. She wasn't obligated to announce it." There was a pause. My mother took pauses when she was deciding how to approach something, and the length of the pause told me something about how she was approaching this one. She said, "Jenna already paid a deposit to the catering company." I said, "I understand that. Jenna will need to speak with the catering company about their cancellation policy." My mother said, "That's not. Rachel, this is the family house. It's where we've always." I said, "Mom, it's where Grandma always hosted." She transferred it to me because she decided to. That's the whole of it. Another pause. Longer. She said, "Are you going to cancel the reunion?" I said, "I haven't decided what I'm going to do with the property. I'm going to make that decision carefully. What I'm certain of is that an event involving the whole family at a property I own requires a conversation with me, not 62 messages in a thread I was specifically excluded from." She said, "I shouldn't have said that. About the drama." I said, "No." She said, "I'm sorry." I said I heard her. That was accurate. I did hear her. What I was still working out was what I wanted to do with what I heard, and that felt like something that deserved more than a Thursday afternoon phone call to resolve. Jenna called me Friday evening. I had been expecting it and had thought about how I wanted to approach it, which is the only kind of preparation that is actually available to you for conversations like that one. She called at 7:22. She was, from the first sentence, in a mode I recognized. The mode she uses when she has decided that a situation is recoverable and that her job is to recover it. She is good at this. She has a warmth that is genuine and a momentum that is also genuine, and the combination can move a conversation in a direction before you have fully decided whether you want to go there. She said, "Rach, I want to talk about this. I really want to figure this out." I said, "Okay." She said, "I didn't know about the deed. None of us did. Grandma never." I said, "I know you didn't know. That's a separate question from the one about the group chat." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "The reason I found out about the reunion was because Becca forwarded me the chat by accident, which means that if she hadn't made that mistake, I would have found out when 60 people showed up at a house I own." She said, "I know that looks bad." I said, "I'm not talking about how it looks. I'm talking about what it was." There was a silence. Jenna's silences are different from my mother's, less deliberate, more the silence of someone who has encountered an argument they don't have an immediate counter to. She said, "Mom said you shouldn't cause drama. I should have pushed back on that." I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm saying that now." I said, "I appreciate that." She said, "So what happens? With the reunion, with the house, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to take some time and make a decision that I think is right for the property. If I decide a family reunion is something I want to host, I'll be part of planning it, not forwarded into it after 62 messages." She said, "And the deposit?" I said, "That's between you and the catering company." She said, "Rachel." I said, "Jenna, I'm not going to make this easier than it actually is. You planned an event at my house and didn't tell me. That's the thing we're working from." She said, "I know." Her voice had shifted, the momentum was gone, and what was underneath it was something quieter and, I thought, more honest. She said, "I didn't think of it as your house. I thought of it as Grandma's house." I said, "I understand that." She said, "When did that change for you?" I said, "When Grandma asked me to take care of the dock." There was another silence. Then she said, "Okay." Just that. And I understood from the way she said it that something had shifted in her accounting of the situation. Not resolved, not forgiven, but recalibrated in a way that was the beginning of something more honest between us. We talked for another 20 minutes about things that were not the house. That felt right. Not resolved, but begun. I called my grandmother on our usual Sunday evening. I told her what had happened, the group chat, the letter from Thomas Hadley, the calls from my mother and Jenna. She listened without interrupting, which she always does. When I finished, she said, "Well, that happened sooner than I expected." I said, "Did you expect it to happen?" She said, "I expected something to happen eventually. Property has a way of clarifying things." She paused. Then she said, "Are you all right?" I said I was. I said it had been a complicated week, but that I felt clear about it, which was true. She said clarity was usually worth the complication. I said I thought so too. She asked about the dock. I told her Pete Calloway had already been out in April and that the north end was holding well and that I'd had the cleats replaced on the main float. She said she was glad. She said she missed sitting on the dock in the morning with coffee, that the light on Crescent Lake in the early morning was a specific kind of light she had not found anywhere else in 81 years of looking. I said I would take a photograph for her next time I was there.
She said she would like that.
We talked about her Thursday card game and about a book she was reading and about a mild dispute she was having with her neighbor over the communal garden's watering schedule. We did not talk about the deed again. It did not need to be talked about. It was filed, and it had done the thing it needed to do, and now it was just the ordinary background of our lives. Mine as the owner, hers as the person who had decided to make me one. In the months that followed, the family's relationship with what had happened settled into something I would describe as a slow adjustment rather than a resolution. These things do not resolve the way people want them to, cleanly, with a moment where everyone understands and agrees, and the conversation closes. They adjust. They redistribute. People recalibrate the assumptions they have been operating on and build new ones, and the new ones are more accurate, and the accuracy is uncomfortable at first, and then becomes ordinary. My Aunt Paulette did not speak to me directly for 6 weeks. When she did, the conversation was brief and careful, the conversation of two people who have agreed, without saying so, to be courteous rather than to pretend nothing happened. That felt accurate. Courtesy seemed like the right register for where we were. My mother called more often in the weeks after. The calls were different. She asked more questions and offered fewer interpretations, which was its own form of change. I noticed it and did not comment on it because commenting on it would have made it a thing to be managed rather than a thing that was just happening. Jenna and I had 2 more conversations over the following 6 weeks that were more honest than most of the conversations we had had in the previous decade. She told me things I had not known about how the family discussed me when I wasn't present. I told her things I had observed that I had not said out loud before. Neither of us finished those conversations feeling better exactly, more accurate, which I have come to believe is sometimes more useful than better. In August, 4 months after the group chat, I drove out to Crescent Lake for a long weekend. I stayed in the lake house alone, the first time I had stayed there, as its owner, for more than a single day. I opened the windows and let the morning air in, and made coffee, and took it down to the dock, which was holding well, and sat there in the early morning light that my grandmother had described, and found that she was right about it. It was a specific quality of light. The way it came across the water at that angle in August, low and gold, and not yet warm, the kind that makes everything it touches look like it has been there a long time and intends to remain. I took a photograph. I sent it to my grandmother. She replied in 12 minutes with, "That's the one. Thank you." I sat on the dock for another hour with my coffee going cold the way coffee does when you're not paying attention to it, which is the only way I have ever been able to sit on a dock in the morning. I thought about my grandmother in Gerald Park's office, except it had been Cheryl Lim at Birchwood Title and Thomas Hadley on Millbrook Avenue, and I thought about the envelope she had mailed me with a note about the dock, and I thought about the recording number I had written in the margin of a variance report on a Tuesday morning. I thought about the word dramatic, about what it means in the specific context of a family, where it is almost always applied to the person who noticed something the others were hoping would go unnoticed. The person who asked the follow-up question. The person who looked at the numbers behind the top-line figures. I had been called dramatic by my family in various ways for most of my adult life, and I had spent most of that time trying to understand whether they were right. Sitting on the dock that morning, I understood they were not right, and I understood more precisely why. Dramatic is the word for someone who manufactures a reaction. What I do, what I have always done, is notice what is already there and respond to it accurately. Those are not the same action, and the difference between them is not dramatic. It is the difference between making something up and telling the truth. The light shifted. The lake surface changed from gold to a clearer blue. Somewhere across the water, a boat engine turned over and then settled into a low idle. I finished my cold coffee. I went back up to the house. I made breakfast and opened the windows wider and let the morning in. 3 months after the group chat, my sister Jenna texted me a photograph of a catering company's cancellation policy document. Below it she had written, "For the record, I got 70% back. Thought you'd appreciate knowing the number." I looked at that message for a moment. Then I replied, "I do appreciate it. That's a reasonable cancellation policy." She sent back a single laughing emoji. It was, I thought, the beginning of us finding a register that was ours. Not what we had been before, which had involved a set of assumptions that no longer fit, but something that could be built on the ground of what was actually true about us. That felt like enough. Not the whole distance traveled, but enough for the day. There is a specific thing about the number 62 that I have thought about more than it deserves. 62 messages. 11 days of planning. My mother's message at number 41. I was not supposed to see any of it, and I saw all of it because Becca hit forward instead of reply, and the wrong name was one letter away from the right one. I have thought about what would have happened if she hadn't made that mistake. If the reunion had proceeded, if 60 people had arrived at 4 Timber Ridge Road for a weekend in July, if I had found out the way you find out things when you are the one not in the room, after the fact, from someone who assumed you already knew. I have thought about that version of events, and I have thought about how long it might have continued, the assumption that the house was available, the planning that treated my ownership as irrelevant, the next reunion, and the one after that. I am glad Becca hit the wrong name. Not because it led to a confrontation I wanted, I did not want it, but because it meant the thing that was already true became visible at a moment when I could do something accurate with it. The deed had been filed for 3 years. It was not going to change. What changed was whether the people who needed to understand it had been given the information. They had not been given it gracefully. They had been given it because someone's thumb hit the wrong contact on a Tuesday morning, which is not elegant, but which is, I have come to believe, a perfectly ordinary way for the truth to surface. You cannot keep a filed document invisible forever. The county recorder's office is open to the public. The search portal is free. The information was there for anyone who thought to look. For 3 years, waiting with the same patience that documents have, which is absolute because documents do not get tired of waiting and they do not change their minds. The truth about a situation does not require a dramatic reveal. It requires someone to look it up. Sometimes that person is you. Sometimes it is an attorney in the morning. Sometimes it is a cousin who hits forward instead of reply and does not realize, until later, what she has set in motion. The document was always there. The morning it mattered, someone looked. There is a moment from the Friday call with Jenna that I want to ask you about because it is the one I keep returning to. It was when she said, "I didn't think of it as your house. I thought of it as Grandma's house." And I said, "I understand that." And she said, "When did that change for you?" And I said, "When Grandma asked me to take care of the dock." I have thought about that exchange more than any other part of what happened, because it was the first moment in all of it that felt like 2 people actually talking rather than 2 people managing a situation. She was telling me something true about her own assumption, and I was telling her something true about mine, and for a moment neither of us was trying to win anything. If you have ever been the one who is quietly maintaining something, a doc, a relationship, a set of records, a piece of someone's life that no one else was taking care of, and then watch someone else try to use it as if it were theirs. Was there a moment when the person who assumed finally understood what you had been doing all along? Not thanked you, not apologized, just understood. Saw the doc and realized it had been cared for. Leave it in the comments. I read them. If this stayed with you, a like and subscribe help more people find it. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'm Rachel. Thank you for being here.